want to just offer a couple of other comments about my background, which is that as I was getting ready to retire, I was looking for a way to apply my skills in a useful way. And I haven't practiced medicine for over 20 years, and I felt a need to get back in touch with being a primary care doctor, which I was trained to do, which is about being a very holistic doctor that looks at the individual patient in the context of their family, in the context of all of their diverse values and priorities and beliefs, and also as a physician who wants to avoid medical therapies when a natural approach and an environmental approach can be successful. So that's my background as a doctor. My father was a pediatrician. I made house calls as a child with a pediatrician, and I grew up to want to be a primary care doctor, looking at the whole patient and their entire lives and trying to help them avoid using the medical care system through lifestyle changes and such. GenSpect I found when I was searching for an organization interested in this topic. It is a very interesting organization. It is led by a woman who was transgender in her teen years, who as she went through puberty and grew out of adolescence, she, what we call, desisted. She came to realize that her body was fine, just as it was, that she didn't need medical intervention, and that she was happy being herself. She herself is a very gender non-conforming person who loves being now a mother. It's one of her most valued aspects of her personality. Her name is Stella O'Malley. She grew up in rural Ireland. The leadership team include 2 gay men, not that that should be relevant, but one of whom was transgender when he was young, but as an adolescent he grew to be 6'6", and he came to appreciate that his body was male and that he was same-sex attracted, and that he didn't hate himself in that he had internalized homophobia and thought that he needed to become a woman to become comfortable with his sexual orientation, and he gradually came to realize he was a same-sex attracted person, and he grew comfortable in his own body. There are numerous advisors to GenSpect who are trans-identified people, transitioned people, detransitioned people, all of whom really what we share in common is a vision whereby people who are gender nonconforming can love themselves exactly the way they are and not pursue medical and surgical transition in life, and that they will come to be completely comfortable with themselves as they are, and that people around them will accept them as they are. So that's who GenSpect is. The Society for Evidence-Based Medicine is an organization that I found because of my long-term commitment to evidence-based medicine. I became a physician at Mass General Hospital in Boston in the 80s, and by the 90s I was working in evidence-based medicine. And what does that mean? It means it was really in the 1990s that we developed methodologies to evaluate research and science, to be able to say, these studies prove this cancer treatment will make a benefit to these kinds of cancer patients, and that we could have confidence in the evidence and know that when we gave a drug to a patient, we would know what the risks were, what the benefits were, what the long-term impact on the person would be. And we could evaluate whether the science was worth trusting. So I lived through that era in medicine, because prior to that time what we did was we listened to people who said, I'm an expert in this, I've treated people with this, and I believe we should do X. And in the expert era of medicine, we had lobotomies, we had doctors encouraging smoking, we had diethylstilbestrol given to pregnant women, and they gave birth to children with birth defects. There are many, many stories of where medicine has gone wrong because an expert advised something when we didn't have the science. So when I was getting ready to retire, I was looking around at where's the science around gender medicine? What does the science tell us about doing something so dramatic as to socially transition children, give them hormones, which we know will cause all kinds of side effects that could shorten their lifespan and harm them, and go on to mutilating surgeries? Where's the science that proves that helps children? And the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine was the place that I went to find researchers from around the world who in fact are well informed over the fact that we don't have studies that prove, not only we don't have studies that prove positive impact, we don't have studies that improve mental health benefit. So we're currently telling children, we'll help you feel better by doing a variety of things to you, and we have no scientific evidence with any robust basis that can show them and can convince children or their parents that they will have better mental health as a result. So that's a little bit about those two organizations which I work with. Okay, so what are we going to cover? I'm going to explain to you the science, the medical science, and at a high level, the research around gender dysphoria, what it is and what the treatments are. And then I want to talk a little bit about the state of the science, because it's actually quite rapidly changing. It has changed in the year and a half that I've worked in this arena, and I will just say I've spoken to about 150 parents around the United States, England, Germany, Spain, Australia, over the course of those 18 months. And I've spoken to about 30 adult individuals who are beyond transition. Many of them have gone through various medical and surgical interventions and then came to realize this was not helping them, and they have detransitioned. So I ran a program called Beyond Trans that helps individuals who have transitioned socially, medically, surgically, who are not yet happy in their lives. I would match them with psychologists around the world who were hard to find, but I would locate them, and I would match the young person, they were all adults, they were over 18, with a psychologist wherever I could find one who would work with them online usually, because they were all over the world, who would help them begin to address the questions that had not been addressed before they transitioned. So for example, was there trauma in their life that caused them to feel a need to change their gender? Was there depression and anxiety? Did they have learning disabilities? Had they had an eating disorder? What was going on in the home that might have contributed to the sense that they needed to take major steps in their life? So I want to talk to you about the state of the science and how it has changed in the last 2 years, which is quite dramatic, and also how much is now being published that wasn't previously. All right, what is gender dysphoria and how is it addressed? So just to be clear, I think you probably all know this, but gender dysphoria is when one is distressed by their biological sex. It is a DSM-5 diagnosis, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Psychiatry. It is a diagnosis. It used to be called gender identity disorder, and most recently it is now called gender dysphoria. A person may or may not feel the following things. They may feel like they were born in the wrong body. They may not. It often, and this is what has changed recently, changed in the last decade, it occurs with other diagnoses in place. The most common, actually, among young people today who identify as gender dysphoric is anxiety and depression. We don't really know how often it coexists with people who are on the autism spectrum. We're flying blind a lot of the time because we never treated the treatment protocol called gender affirming care as experimental in this country. Now just think about that. We never addressed it as an experimental intervention. And I'm going to show you the world's experts in gender dysphoria who have taken care of people who experience this for decades in Sweden, Finland, England, and other countries. Sweden being the country who has treated the most people for the longest with the most interventions in gender dysphoria. Their experts clearly identify gender affirmative care as experimental. We do not have science that clearly shows it's of value to the people we're using it with. Okay, so definitely occurs, unclear how often, with other mental health disorders and conditions. Clearly is influenced by peer influence. Now this is another area that's very well debated. You can find doctors who provide gender affirming care who will say it is not a social contagion. The evidence is overwhelming. It is a social contagion. I have talked to students at schools where 40% of the children are non-binary or trans-identified. The town where my medical school was in Davis, California, has the highest incidence of trans-identified students in the state of California. And California itself has a 40% higher incidence of trans and other gender non-conforming identities compared to the rest of the country. So it's clearly not equally distributed. The other thing that's very interesting about it is disproportionately, we find it in white people, girls, and in middle to upper middle class communities. So it's not equally distributed across the culture and across demographic groups. And I will say also with gender dysphoria, not everyone decides to adopt a transgender identity. There's all kinds of information about people who are gender nonconforming, who choose to appear different ways at different times and are experiment with how they feel comfortable presenting to the world. And actually, large percentages of people choose not to medicalize. We'll